The stagecoach rattled into Ordway, Colorado on a blistering July afternoon in 1882, and Beatrice Richardson pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the dust swirl around wooden buildings that looked nothing like the illustrations in the letters she had received over the past 6 months. Her stomach twisted with a familiar anxiety that had plagued her since leaving Boston 3 weeks ago. The man who had written those letters, Russell Emmett, had painted pictures of a prosperous ranch, a comfortable home, and a life that would be far better than the one she was leaving behind. But Beatrice had learned long ago that words on paper could hide a multitude of sins. Her father had been a master of writing beautiful promises while delivering nothing but disappointment and debt. When he had died 8 months ago, leaving her with nothing but his gambling debts and the hungry eyes of his creditors, she had made a desperate choice. Marriage to a stranger felt safer than the alternative paths available to a 22-year-old woman alone in Boston. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside a building marked as the general store, and the driver called out their arrival. Beatrice smoothed down her navy traveling dress, checking that her dark blonde hair was still neatly pinned beneath her modest hat. She had dressed carefully this morning, wanting to make a good impression while also maintaining a practical appearance. The other passenger, a merchant heading to Denver, had already stepped down and was collecting his luggage. "Miss Richardson." A voice called from outside the coach, deep and uncertain. Beatrice took a breath, gathering her courage, and accepted the driver's hand as she stepped down into the Colorado sunshine. The heat hit her immediately, so different from the humid warmth of a Boston summer. This was a dry, intense heat that seemed to press against her skin. The man standing before her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his worn cotton shirt. His hair was dark brown, almost black and slightly too long, curling at his collar. His face was weathered from years in the sun, making it difficult to determine his exact age, though she guessed he was perhaps 27 or 28. What struck her most were his eyes, a startling blue-gray that watched her with a mixture of hope and nervousness that matched her own feelings. "Mr. Emmett," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Russell, please," he said, removing his hat and holding it in both hands. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Beatrice admitted, studying his face for signs of dishonesty or cruelty. Her father had taught her to watch for tells, the small gestures that revealed a man's true nature. So far, she saw only genuine nervousness. "But I am here safely." "Your trunk." Russell gestured toward the back of the stagecoach where the driver was already unloading luggage. "The brown one with the brass corners," Beatrice said, pointing. Russell moved quickly, lifting her heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing and securing it in the back of a sturdy wagon that waited nearby. The wagon was well maintained, she noticed, the wood recently oiled and the horses healthy-looking. Small signs, but ones that suggested a man who took care of his possessions. "I thought we might stop by the restaurant for some lunch before heading to the ranch," Russell said, returning to stand a respectful distance from her. "Unless you would prefer to go straight there." "The ride is about 40 minutes. Beatrice's stomach rumbled quietly, reminding her that she had eaten very little that morning, too nervous to keep anything down. "Lunch would be welcome, thank you." The restaurant was a simple establishment with wooden tables and checkered curtains, but it was clean, and the smell of cooking food made Beatrice realize just how hungry she actually was. Russell held out a chair for her, another small gesture that eased some of her tension. A man who remembered manners despite years of ranch life might be a man who would treat a wife with respect. They ordered roasted chicken with potatoes and vegetables, and for a few minutes they ate in awkward silence. Beatrice could feel curious eyes on them from other diners, and she knew they must be wondering about the stranger who had arrived to marry Russell Emmett. "I imagine you have questions," Russell said finally, setting down his fork and meeting her eyes. "And concerns. I want you to know that I understand if you are having second thoughts. I can arrange for you to stay at the boarding house in town while you decide if this is truly what you want." His honesty surprised her. Most men would have rushed her to the preacher, afraid she might change her mind. "You would do that, Beatrice. I wrote to you looking for a partner, a wife who would choose to build a life with me," Russell said, his voice low and earnest. "Not a woman who felt trapped into a marriage she did not want. If you need time to be certain, then take it. I can wait." Something in her chest loosened slightly. "That is kind of you," she said carefully, "but I made a commitment when I agreed to come here. I do have questions, however. Ask me anything. Why did you send for a mail-order bride? A man like you, with a ranch and prospects, surely there must be women here who would have been interested." Russell smiled slightly, but there was sadness in it. Ordway is a small town, and most of the young women here already have their futures planned out with boys they grew up with. The few who might have been interested, well, they wanted a town life. They wanted a husband who would work in the general store or the bank, not a rancher who would be gone for long hours and come home smelling like cattle and horses. "And what exactly do you expect from a wife?" Beatrice asked, deciding that directness was better than uncertainty. "A partner," Russell said without hesitation. "Someone who will not mind the isolation of ranch life, who wants to build something lasting. I do not expect perfection, Beatrice. I know this is not the life you were raised for, and there will be difficulties. But I can promise you that I will work every day to make sure you never regret coming here. I will never raise a hand to you, never gamble away our money, and never give you cause to doubt that I value you." The specificity of his promises made Beatrice wonder if he had somehow divined her fears. She studied his face again, looking for deception, but saw only sincerity. "How can you make such promises to someone you have never met?" "Because I know what kind of man I am," Russell said simply. "And I know what kind of man I want to be. My father drank himself to death and left my mother with nothing. I watched what that did to her, the humiliation and the struggle. I swore I would never be that kind of man. When I wrote those letters to you, I meant every word. I will spend every day proving to you that you made the right choice in coming here." Beatrice felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes and blinked them back quickly. "That is quite a promise." "It is the only one that matters," Russell said. They finished their meal with slightly easier conversation, Russell telling her about the ranch and Beatrice sharing carefully edited stories about Boston. She did not mention her father's debts or the creditor who had cornered her in their parlor with suggestions that made her skin crawl. Some truths were too heavy to share on a first meeting. The wagon ride to the ranch took them through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. The landscape was vast in a way that made Beatrice feel small, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. The sky seemed impossibly large, a brilliant blue that stretched from horizon to horizon without the interruption of tall buildings. "That is the boundary of my land," Russell said, pointing to a line of fence posts. 300 acres. Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it is mine, free and clear. No debt on it. The emphasis on the lack of debt did not escape Beatrice's notice. Perhaps he understood more about her circumstances than she had revealed in her letters. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Beatrice felt her anxiety spike again. It was a simple structure, wood frame with a covered porch, smaller than she had imagined but solidly built. Nearby stood a large barn, a chicken coop, and several other outbuildings. "It is not fancy," Russell said, and she could hear the defensive note in his voice. "But it is sound. The roof does not leak, and I have been making improvements. I added the porch last year, and I have been working on expanding the house. There are 2 bedrooms now instead of 1. Beatrice understood what he was telling her. He had built her a separate bedroom, giving her privacy and choice. The tension in her shoulders eased another fraction. "It looks very sturdy." Russell helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong but gentle on her waist, and then carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was neat, surprisingly so for a bachelor. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and simple but well-made furniture. Everything was clean if sparse. "Your room is through here," Russell said, leading her to one of 2 doors off the main room. The bedroom was small but pleasant, with a real bed frame, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, and Beatrice felt her throat tighten at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "I will let you settle in," Russell said from the doorway. "I need to tend to the evening chores, but I will be back to make dinner, unless you are too tired, and then I can bring you something." "I can help with dinner," Beatrice said. "I am not an excellent cook, but I am adequate." Russell smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Then we will cook together. I make a decent stew, and I have fresh bread from town." After he left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. The room felt foreign, the sounds outside her window strange. The lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant call of a bird she could not identify. Everything was different from the life she had known, but Russell seemed kind. More than kind, he seemed genuinely committed to making this work. That was more than she had dared hope for when she had answered his advertisement 6 months ago. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the simple wardrobe and arranging her belongings on the dresser. She had not brought much, most of her father's possessions having been sold to pay his debts. The few things she had kept were personal, small treasures that reminded her of her mother, who had died when Beatrice was 12. By the time Russell returned, she had changed into a simpler cotton dress and had explored the main room of the house. She found the kitchen area well stocked with basic supplies, and she was setting out plates when he came through the door. "You did not have to do that," he said, but he looked pleased. "I want to be useful," Beatrice said. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Russell said firmly. "You are my intended wife, and this is your home now, but I appreciate the help." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of stew and bread, and Beatrice found herself relaxing into the domestic rhythm. Russell moved efficiently in the kitchen, clearly accustomed to caring for himself, but he made space for her naturally, showing her where things were kept and asking her preferences. Over dinner, he told her more about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd and eventually hire some help. He spoke about the town, about the neighbors who lived several miles away, about the harsh winters and the beautiful springs. Beatrice listened, asking questions, and slowly began to form a picture of what her life here might be like. "When were you thinking we should be married?" Beatrice asked as they cleared the dishes, deciding that practical questions were safer than examining her confused emotions too closely. Russell paused, his hands in the dishwater. "I thought we might wait a week or 2, let you get settled and be certain. The preacher comes through Ordway once a month, and he will be back in 10 days. But if you want more time, we can wait until his next visit." 10 days seems reasonable," Beatrice said. It was longer than many mail-order brides were given, but short enough that she would not spend months in an uncertain limbo. "There is something else we should discuss," Russell said, drying his hands and turning to face her. I know this arrangement is not conventional, and I know you do not know me well. I want you to understand that I will not expect, that is, I will not assume that just because we are married, you will, I mean to say." He stopped, clearly struggling with the words. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks as she understood what he was trying to say. "You are saying that you will not demand your marital rights. I am saying that I want our marriage to be a real partnership, and that includes, well, that aspect of it," Russell said, his own face flushed. "But I want you to come to me willingly when you are ready, not because you feel obligated. I can be patient." No man had ever said such a thing to Beatrice before. In her world, men took what they believed they were owed, and women were expected to submit. The fact that Russell was offering her choice in this most intimate matter shook something loose inside her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you might realize." They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and then Russell showed her how to bar the door for the night and where he kept the rifle, just in case. "It is not likely we will have trouble," he said, "but I want you to know how to protect yourself when I am out on the range." That night, lying in her new bed in her new room, Beatrice listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night and tried to imagine a future here. Russell had gone to his own room, calling a gentle good night through the door, and she was alone with her thoughts. She had expected many things when she agreed to become a mail-order bride. She had expected a man who wanted a housekeeper and a woman to warm his bed. She had expected, at best, polite distance, and at worst, cruelty. She had not expected kindness, patience, and genuine respect. Russell Emmett was already proving to be different from any man she had known. The question was whether she could allow herself to trust that, or whether her past would keep her forever cautious and afraid. The next morning, Beatrice woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory returned. Colorado. The ranch. Russell. She dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find Russell already up, coffee brewing on the stove and bacon sizzling in a pan. He turned when he heard her, and his face lit up with a smile that made him look almost boyish. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you." "I am used to starting early." "Not at all," Beatrice said. "What time is it?" "A little past 6. I have already been out to feed the animals and milk the cow. I thought you might like to sleep in on your first day." 6 in the morning was sleeping in. Beatrice tried not to show her surprise. "What can I do to help?" "Just sit and have some coffee," Russell said. "Breakfast will be ready in a moment." But Beatrice did not want to sit idle while he worked, so she found cups and poured coffee for them both, and then began slicing bread for toast. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, and Beatrice was struck by how easy it felt, how natural. Over breakfast, Russell outlined his plans for the day. He needed to ride out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, a task that would take most of the morning. "You are welcome to come with me if you would like to see more of the ranch," he offered. "Or you can stay here and rest. I know you have been traveling for weeks." Beatrice considered. Part of her wanted to hide in the house to avoid the overwhelming newness of everything. But a stronger part of her knew that hiding would only make things harder. "I would like to come with you," she said. "If I am to live here, I should learn about the ranch." Russell's smile was worth the decision. "I will saddle a horse for you. Do you ride?" "I used to when I was younger," Beatrice admitted, "but it has been several years and I never rode Western style." "It is not so different," Russell assured her, "and I have a gentle mare that will treat you well." An hour later, Beatrice found herself on horseback for the first time in years, wearing a split skirt she had brought specifically for the possibility of riding. The mare Russell had chosen was indeed gentle, responsive to the lightest touch, and Beatrice felt her confidence returning as they rode out across the grassland. Russell was a patient teacher, pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of his property. He showed her where the creek ran, providing water for the cattle, and where the best grazing land was located. He talked about his plans to build up the herd, to eventually have enough cattle to make a real profit from the annual drive to market. "It is hard work," he said honestly. "And some years are better than others. But it is a good life and it is ours. No one can take it from us." Beatrice heard the emphasis on the word ours and felt something warm unfold in her chest. He was already including her in his plans, already treating her as a partner rather than an accessory. They found the cattle scattered across a wide pasture, and Russell rode among them, checking their condition with a practiced eye. Beatrice watched him work, noting how confidently he handled the huge animals, how they responded to his calm presence. "You love this," she observed when he returned to her side. "I do," Russell admitted. "I know it is not glamorous work, but there is something satisfying about it. Building something with your own hands, watching it grow. My father never built anything in his life, just tore things down. I wanted something different." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and Beatrice found herself studying Russell when she thought he was not looking. He was handsome in a rugged way, all lean muscle and sun-weathered skin. But more than that, he seemed genuinely good, kind, patient, the sort of man she had not believed really existed. Over the next few days they fell into a rhythm. Russell would rise early to handle the morning chores, and Beatrice would join him for breakfast. Sometimes she would accompany him on his work around the ranch, learning about caring for the animals and maintaining the property. Other times she would stay at the house, cooking and cleaning and beginning to make the space feel like her own. Russell was unfailingly kind, but also respectful of her space. He never pushed her to talk about her past, never made demands on her time or attention. Instead, he simply worked steadily to show her through his actions that she could trust him. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Russell said, "Tell me about Boston. What do you miss most?" Beatrice thought about it carefully. "The ocean," she said finally. "I miss the smell of salt air and the sound of gulls. The libraries, too. Boston has wonderful libraries." "What did you like to read?" Russell asked, genuinely interested. "Everything," Beatrice admitted. "Novels, poetry, history. I love stories about people and places far from my own experience." Russell was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I am not much of a reader myself, never had much schooling, but I would like it if you would read to me sometimes, if you do not mind. I brought back a few books from town last time I was there, hoping you might like them." He sounded almost shy, and Beatrice felt her heart squeeze. "I would enjoy that very much." That night, after the dishes were cleared, Russell presented her with 3 books, clearly purchased recently based on their pristine condition. One was a collection of poems by Longfellow, one was a novel by Charles Dickens, and the third was a book of prairie tales. Beatrice ran her fingers over the covers, touched beyond words that he had thought to buy her gifts. She chose the poetry collection and settled into one of the chairs by the fireplace. Russell sat across from her, pretending to work on mending a bridle, but she could tell he was listening intently as she read. Her voice filled the small house, bringing the words to life, and when she glanced up between poems, she found Russell watching her with an expression of such contentment that it made her breath catch. The days passed quickly, each one bringing small revelations and unexpected moments of connection. Russell taught her how to collect eggs from the chicken coop without getting pecked, how to feed the horses, how to read the sky for signs of approaching weather. In turn, Beatrice began to improve his meals, adding herbs she found growing wild near the creek, baking pies from preserved fruit she discovered in the cellar. She learned that Russell loved music, but could not carry a tune, that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter, that he worried constantly about whether she was happy. She learned that he took his coffee black, that he always carried a knife his grandfather had given him, that he had a deep respect for the land and the animals in his care. And slowly, carefully, she began to let him see pieces of herself. She told him about her mother's death, about the loneliness of growing up with only a distracted father for company. She did not tell him about the debts or the creditors, not yet, but she let him understand that she had reasons for leaving Boston that went beyond simple adventure. Russell never pushed for more information than she was willing to give. He simply listened, offering quiet support and understanding. And every day, in 100 small ways, he proved that he was a man of his word. On the 8th day after her arrival, Beatrice was in the kitchen making bread when she heard hoofbeats approaching the house. She looked up to see Russell riding in fast, his face tight with concern. He dismounted quickly and strode toward the house. "What is wrong?" Beatrice asked, meeting him at the door. "One of my cows is having trouble with a birth," Russell said, already moving toward the barn. "I am going to need to help her and it might get messy. I just wanted you to know in case you wondered where I was." "Can I help?" Beatrice asked, following him. Russell paused, turning to look at her. "It is not pleasant work, Beatrice. There will be blood and struggle, and I cannot guarantee the outcome." "I understand," Beatrice said, "but if there is something I can do to help, I want to try." Something shifted in Russell's expression, a deepening of the respect she had already seen there. "All right then. Come on." The next 2 hours were some of the most difficult Beatrice had ever experienced. The cow was in distress, her calf positioned wrong, and Russell had to physically intervene to save both their lives. Beatrice held the lantern steady, brought water when he needed it, and talked to the laboring cow in a soothing voice while Russell worked with grim determination. When the calf finally slipped free, wet and gasping, Beatrice felt tears of relief stream down her face. Russell cleaned the newborn's airways and helped it to its feet, guiding it to its mother's side. The cow, exhausted but alive, began to lick her baby clean. Russell straightened, wiping his bloody hands on a rag, and looked at Beatrice. His face was smudged with dirt and sweat, his shirt ruined, but his eyes were warm. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did well." "I did nothing," Beatrice protested. "You stayed," Russell said. "You did not run from the hard parts. That is not nothing." They walked back to the house together in the gathering darkness, and Beatrice realized that something had changed between them. She had seen Russell in a moment of intensity, had witnessed his competence and his compassion, and it had shifted her understanding of him. He was not just kind, he was strong, not just patient but capable, and she was beginning to believe that he truly meant everything he had promised her. That night, as they cleaned up from a late dinner, Beatrice said, "The preacher comes in 2 days." "He does," Russell agreed, his hands stilling in the dishwater. "I want to go through with the wedding," Beatrice said, her voice steady, "unless you have changed your mind." Russell turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I have not changed my mind, but I need to know that you are certain, Beatrice. I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am certain," Beatrice said, and as she spoke the words, she realized they were true. She did not love Russell, not yet, but she trusted him. And trust, she was beginning to understand, was a better foundation for marriage than the passionate but fleeting emotion she had read about in novels. Russell crossed the space between them, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy," he said quietly. "Every single day for the rest of my life, I will work to prove that you made the right choice." "I believe you," Beatrice whispered, and she did. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant blue without a single cloud. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue silk that she had preserved through all her father's financial troubles because it had been her mother's. She pinned up her hair and wished desperately that she had someone, anyone, to share this moment with. In Boston, she had had a few friends, but no one close enough to correspond with regularly, and certainly no one who could travel to Colorado for a hastily arranged wedding. Russell knocked softly on her door. "The wagon is ready whenever you are," he called through the wood. Beatrice took a final look at herself in the small mirror over her dresser, steadied her nerves, and opened the door. Russell stood in his best clothes, a dark suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on him but which emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build. His hair was freshly washed and combed back, and he had shaved carefully. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you," Beatrice said, smoothing her skirt nervously. "You look very handsome." The ride into town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the small church at the edge of Ordway, Beatrice was surprised to see several people already gathered. Russell helped her down from the wagon and explained quietly, "I hope you do not mind, but I mentioned to a few of the neighbors that we were getting married. They wanted to come and meet you." Beatrice was introduced to a blur of faces. There was Thomas Grant, who owned the ranch to the north, and his wife Martha, a plump, cheerful woman who immediately embraced Beatrice as though they were old friends. There was Samuel Chen, who ran the general store, and his sister Lily, who helped him with the accounts. There was the town doctor, a weathered man named Henry Walsh, and the blacksmith, Marcus Stone, with his 3 teenage sons. They all welcomed her warmly, clearly pleased that Russell had found a wife. Martha took her aside for a moment and said, "Russell is a good man, one of the best in these parts. You are lucky to have found him, and he is lucky to have found you. I can tell just by looking that you will be good for each other." The wedding itself was simple and brief. The preacher, Reverend John Matthews, was a serious man with kind eyes who spoke about commitment and partnership rather than duty and obedience. Russell's voice was steady as he made his vows, his hand warm and strong as it held hers. Beatrice's voice shook only slightly as she promised to honor and cherish this man she had known for less than 2 weeks. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Russell bent to kiss her with careful gentleness, a promise rather than a demand. Beatrice felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. The small gathering congratulated them, and Martha insisted they come to the restaurant for a wedding meal. The next 2 hours passed in a happy chaos of food and conversation. Beatrice found herself relaxing into the warmth of community, answering questions about Boston and asking questions about life in Colorado. Russell stayed close to her side the entire time, his hand occasionally resting on the small of her back in a gesture that was becoming familiar and comforting. She caught him watching her several times with an expression of wonder, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. As the afternoon drew to a close and they prepared to return to the ranch, Martha pulled Beatrice aside once more. "If you ever need anything or just want company, you come find me," she said warmly. "Ranch life can be lonely, especially for someone new to it. Do not be a stranger." "Thank you," Beatrice said, genuinely grateful. "That means a great deal to me." The ride back to the ranch felt different from the ride into town. Beatrice was acutely aware that she was now Russell's wife, that everything had changed even if it also felt somehow the same. When they arrived home, Russell helped her down from the wagon with careful courtesy. "I need to tend to the evening chores," he said, and Beatrice heard the nervousness in his voice that matched her own. "Will you be all right for a bit?" "Of course," Beatrice said, grateful for the reprieve. She went inside and changed out of her good dress, hanging it carefully in the wardrobe. She put on a simple cotton dress and unpinned her hair, brushing it out and then braiding it loosely over one shoulder. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she made herself stop and breathe. Russell had promised not to push her, had said he would be patient. She believed him. But she was also aware that they were married now, that he would have expectations even if he was kind enough not to voice them. When Russell returned, he found her in the kitchen, cutting vegetables for dinner with perhaps more focus than the task required. He washed up at the basin and then came to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Beatrice," he said softly, "look at me." She set down the knife and turned to face him, meeting his eyes. "I meant what I said before," Russell told her. "Nothing has changed just because we are married now. I will not push you for anything you are not ready to give. I will sleep in my room and you will sleep in yours until you decide otherwise." "That is very patient of you," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not patience," Russell said. "It is respect. You are my wife, yes, but you are also your own person. I want you to come to me because you want to, not because you think you must." Beatrice felt something inside her chest crack open, some wall she had built around her heart to protect herself. "You are not what I expected," she said. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Russell asked, a hint of humor in his voice. "A very good thing," Beatrice said, and she reached out to take his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and they stood there in the kitchen for a long moment, connected in this small way. They made dinner together, a celebration meal of fried chicken and potatoes, and the apple pie Beatrice had made that morning. They ate on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie in a spectacular display of orange and gold. And when it was time for bed, Russell kissed her cheek gently and retreated to his own room, leaving Beatrice to lie in her bed and think about the strange, unexpected turn her life had taken. The weeks that followed their wedding settled into a comfortable pattern. Russell continued his work on the ranch, and Beatrice took on more and more of the household tasks. She learned to make cheese from the milk of their cow, to preserve vegetables for the coming winter, to bake bread that Russell declared was the best he had ever tasted. But more than the practical partnership, they were building something deeper. Russell made good on his promise to prove himself to her every single day. He brought her wildflowers when he found them on the range. He fixed the squeaky hinge on her bedroom door that had been annoying her. He listened when she read to him in the evenings, asking thoughtful questions about the stories and characters. He told her she was smart and capable and beautiful, and he said it in a way that made her believe he meant it. Beatrice, in turn, found herself wanting to please him in return. She learned his favorite meals and made them without him asking. She mended his clothes with careful stitches, adding small decorative touches that made him smile. She asked questions about his day and listened with genuine interest to his answers. She laughed at his jokes and challenged his opinions and slowly, carefully, led him into the guarded spaces of her heart. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It was late summer now, and the nights were beginning to carry the first hints of autumn's coolness. "Russell," Beatrice said, breaking the comfortable silence, "tell me about your mother." Russell was quiet for a long moment, and Beatrice wondered if she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice low and thoughtful. "She was strong," he said. "Stronger than anyone I have ever known. She held our family together even when my father did everything he could to tear it apart. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads, and she never complained, never said a harsh word about my father even when he deserved it. "What happened to her?" Beatrice asked gently. "She died when I was 19, Russell said. "Pneumonia." By then, my father was already gone, drank himself to death 2 years earlier. I think she just did not have any fight left in her. She had spent so many years surviving that when she finally had a chance to rest, her body just gave up. "I am so sorry," Beatrice said, reaching over to take his hand. Russell squeezed her fingers. "It was a long time ago, but it shaped who I am, you know. I watched what my father's choices did to her, and I swore I would never be that kind of man. That is why I can promise you the things I have promised, because I know exactly the kind of man I do not want to be." "You are a good man, Russell Emmett," Beatrice said firmly. "One of the best I have ever known." "You make me want to be better," Russell said, turning to look at her in the fading light. "Every day I want to be the man you see when you look at me." Something in the air between them shifted, charged with possibility. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster, felt the warmth of his hand in hers and the steady presence of him beside her. She had been thinking about this moment for days now, working up her courage, and suddenly she knew that she was ready. "Russell," she said softly, "I think I would like you to kiss me. Really kiss me, I mean." His eyes widened slightly, and she saw hope and desire and careful restraint warring in his expression. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Beatrice said. Russell stood, gently pulling her to her feet. He cupped her face in both hands, his calloused fingers tender against her skin. "I have been wanting to do this since the moment I saw you step off that stage coach," he whispered. And then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the careful, chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was deeper, more passionate, a promise and a question all at once. Beatrice felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Beatrice," Russell said, his voice rough. "If you want me to stop, you need to tell me now." "I do not want you to stop," Beatrice said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Russell swept her up into his arms, carrying her inside as though she weighed nothing. He paused in the main room, giving her one more chance to change her mind, but Beatrice wound her arms around his neck and kissed him again. He carried her to his room, the larger of the 2 bedrooms, and set her carefully on the bed. What followed was tender and passionate, and occasionally awkward in the way of 2 people learning each other for the first time. But Russell was patient and attentive, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted this. And Beatrice found herself falling into a new kind of trust, a physical intimacy that complemented the emotional connection they had been building. Afterward, lying in Russell's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Beatrice felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This marriage, this life, this man. She had been so afraid when she stepped off that stage coach 6 weeks ago, so certain that she was making a terrible mistake. But Russell had proven himself in every way that mattered. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the first time she had said those words to him. Russell's arms tightened around her. "I have loved you since you agreed to read poetry to me," he said. "Maybe even before that. I love you, Beatrice Emmett, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you made the right choice." Beatrice smiled against his chest, tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. "I already know I made the right choice," she said. "You prove it to me every single day." The transition from separate bedrooms to sharing one was accomplished naturally over the next few days. Beatrice moved her clothes into Russell's room, which they now thought of as their room, and they converted her old bedroom into a space for storage. And eventually, Russell suggested quietly, perhaps a nursery. The mention of children made Beatrice's heart skip. She had not let herself think too far into the future, had been too focused on navigating each day as it came. But now, lying secure in Russell's love, she let herself imagine a life filled with children, with laughter, with the family she had always wanted but never dared to hope for. As autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and red, Beatrice and Russell's bond deepened further. They worked side by side to prepare for the coming winter, preserving food and making repairs to the barn and outbuildings. Russell taught Beatrice to shoot, patiently correcting her form until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. Beatrice taught Russell to read better, working through the novels she had brought from Boston with him in the evenings. They visited town together once a week, and Beatrice became friends with Martha Grant and Lily Chen. The three women would meet for tea while Russell and the other men discussed cattle prices and weather predictions. Beatrice found herself settling into the community, no longer an outsider but a respected member of Ordway society. When the first snow fell in late November, Beatrice woke to a world transformed. She stood at the window, marveling at the pristine white landscape, and felt Russell's arms come around her from behind. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "It is going to make everything harder for the next few months," Russell said pragmatically. "But yes, it is beautiful." Winter in Colorado was harsher than anything Beatrice had experienced in Boston. The temperatures plummeted, and the wind howled across the prairie with a ferocity that frightened her at first. But Russell had prepared well, and their little house stayed warm and cozy. They spent long evenings by the fireplace, reading and talking and making love, while outside the world turned white and cold. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Beatrice finally told Russell the full truth about why she had left Boston. She told him about her father's gambling, about the debts, about the creditor who had cornered her with implications that made her stomach turn. She told him about the shame and the fear and the desperate feeling that she had to escape before something terrible happened. Russell listened without interruption, his face growing darker with anger as she spoke. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I am glad you came here," he said fiercely. "I am glad you chose to answer my advertisement. And if that man ever shows his face in Colorado, I will make him regret ever laying eyes on you." "He will not come here," Beatrice said. "I am nothing to him, just another debtor who escaped his grasp." "You are not nothing," Russell said. "You are everything. You are my wife, my partner, my love. And I will protect you with my life if necessary." Beatrice believed him. She had learned over the past months that Russell meant what he said always. He did not make empty promises or speak words he did not intend to keep. If he said he would protect her, he would. As winter deepened, Beatrice began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but as the signs became more obvious, she finally confided in Martha during one of their tea meetings in town. Martha's face lit up with delight. "Oh, Beatrice, that is wonderful news. How far along do you think you are?" "Perhaps 2 months," Beatrice said. "Maybe a bit more. I am not entirely certain." "You need to see Dr. Walsh and make sure everything is progressing well," Martha said firmly. "But I am so happy for you and Russell. He will be over the moon." Beatrice told Russell that evening, choosing her moment carefully. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, Russell reading haltingly through a novel while Beatrice mended one of his shirts. She set down her needle and said, "Russell, I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive to the serious note in her voice. "What is it?" "I am fairly certain that I am with child," Beatrice said, watching his face carefully. Russell's expression went through several rapid changes, shock and joy and wonder and fierce protectiveness all flickering across his features. Then he set down his book and crossed to where she sat, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Russell said. "Beatrice, you have given me everything I never dared to hope for, a home, a partner, love, and now a child. I do not have the words to tell you what this means to me." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, careful now in a way he had not been before, as though she had suddenly become fragile. Beatrice laughed and held him tight, feeling happiness swell in her chest, until she thought she might burst with it. The winter months took on a new quality after that. Russell became almost comically protective, insisting that Beatrice not overexert herself, that she stay warm and well-fed and rested. Beatrice found his concern endearing even as she gently reminded him that pregnancy was not an illness, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Dr. Walsh confirmed the pregnancy in January and assured them that Beatrice was healthy and the baby was developing normally. He estimated that the birth would likely occur in late June or early July. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, revealing the greening prairie beneath, Beatrice felt her body changing in obvious ways. Her dresses no longer fit properly, and Martha helped her let out the seams and make new clothes more suitable for her expanding figure. Russell would place his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at the small movements as the baby grew more active. "What do you hope for?" Beatrice asked him one night. "A boy or a girl, I do not care," Russell said honestly. "As long as you both come through healthy, I will be happy. Though I admit I have been thinking about names." "Oh," Beatrice said, intrigued. "If it is a boy, I thought perhaps we could name him after your father," Russell said carefully. "I know he was not perfect, but he was your family." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, thinking about her complicated feelings toward her father. "That is kind of you," she said finally, "but I think I would prefer to choose a name that is ours alone, not connected to the past." "All right," Russell said easily. "Then we will choose together." They spent many evenings discussing names, debating the merits of various options and laughing at some of the more outlandish suggestions. It became a game between them, a joyful anticipation of the new life they were bringing into the world. As Beatrice's due date approached, Martha insisted on coming to stay at the ranch for a few weeks, to help with the household tasks and to be present when the baby came. Russell was profoundly grateful, and Beatrice found comfort in having another woman nearby who had been through childbirth before. The baby decided to arrive in the middle of a hot July night, 3 weeks after Dr. Walsh's estimated due date. Beatrice woke to the unmistakable sensation of labor beginning and shook Russell awake. He immediately went from sound asleep to fully alert, jumping out of bed and pulling on his clothes. "I will ride for the doctor," he said, already moving toward the door. "There is time," Beatrice said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "Wake Martha first." The next 12 hours were some of the longest and most difficult of Beatrice's life. Labor was hard, painful, and exhausting in ways she had not anticipated. But Russell stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand when she needed him, giving her space when she asked for it, and offering constant encouragement. When their son finally entered the world in the late afternoon, announcing his arrival with a powerful cry, Beatrice felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. Dr. Walsh cleaned the baby and handed him to her, a perfect, wrinkled, angry little person who immediately began rooting for her breast. Russell sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Beatrice, he is absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Beatrice asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Russell took the baby with careful reverence, cradling him against his chest. The infant quieted at his father's touch, and Russell began to cry, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "Thank you," he said to Beatrice, his voice breaking. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." They named him Matthew Russell Emmett, and he was the joy of their lives from the very first moment. Russell proved to be a devoted father, waking in the night to bring the baby to Beatrice for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. The months after Matthew's birth were exhausting but wonderful. Beatrice adjusted to the demands of motherhood while Russell worked to keep the ranch running smoothly. They helped each other, shared the burdens and the joys, and their love for each other deepened with each passing day. When Matthew was 6 months old and beginning to show his personality, a curious, happy baby who laughed easily and loved being outside, Beatrice reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She had arrived in Ordway 16 months ago filled with doubt and fear, certain she was making a terrible mistake. But Russell had proven himself in every way that mattered. He had been patient when she needed patience, strong when she needed strength, and loving every single day. He had shown her through his actions what real partnership looked like, what real love meant. And she had fallen for him completely, deeply, irrevocably. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Matthew play with wooden blocks Russell had carved for him, Beatrice said, "Do you remember what you told me that first day? That you would spend every day proving I made the right choice?" "I remember," Russell said, reaching over to take her hand. "You have kept that promise," Beatrice said. "Every single day you have shown me that coming here was the best decision I ever made. You have given me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible. I just wanted you to know that." Russell brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You made me believe I could be the man I wanted to be," he said. "You saw something in me worth loving, and that changed everything. I am the lucky one, Beatrice." "We are both lucky," Beatrice said firmly. "We found each other against all odds, and we built something beautiful together." The years that followed were filled with the joys and challenges of ranch life and raising a family. 2 years after Matthew's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Jane, who had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's determination. 3 years after that came another son, Daniel Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The ranch prospered under Russell's careful management. He expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and eventually hired 2 young men to help with the work. Beatrice continued to be his partner in all things, managing the household, helping with the accounts, and raising their children to be kind and capable. Martha and Thomas Grant became like family, as did Lily Chen and her eventual husband, Marcus Stone's eldest son. The community of Ordway grew and changed over the years, but Beatrice and Russell remained pillars of it, known for their hospitality and their strong marriage. There were hard times, of course. The winter when they lost half their herd to a terrible blizzard and had to rebuild almost from scratch. The summer when Sarah fell from her horse and broke her arm, sending Beatrice into a panic that Russell had to talk her through. The year when drought threatened everyone's livelihood and the whole community had to pull together to survive. But through all of it, Beatrice and Russell faced challenges as a team. They supported each other, loved each other, and never forgot the promises they had made on that first day when Beatrice had stepped off the stagecoach filled with doubt. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Russell surprised Beatrice with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Martha and Thomas and spent 3 days in the city, staying in a real hotel and eating in fancy restaurants and shopping in stores Beatrice had not seen since leaving Boston. On their last evening, as they dressed for dinner, Russell presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. "I never gave you a proper wedding gift," Russell said as he fastened it around her neck. "We did not have money for such things back then, but I wanted you to have something that showed you how much you mean to me." Beatrice touched the pendant, tears pricking at her eyes. "Russell, you have given me everything that matters. You did not need to do this." "I wanted to," Russell said. "You took a chance on a stranger 20 years ago, Beatrice. You trusted me when you had every reason not to, and you have made every day since then worth living. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Beatrice turned to face him, this man she had built a life with, whose face showed the years but whose eyes still looked at her with the same devotion they had held 2 decades ago. "I love you, Russell Emmett," she said. "Coming to Colorado, marrying you, was the best choice I ever made. And you proved that to me, every single day, just like you promised." They held each other in that Denver hotel room, two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other. And Beatrice thought about the young woman who had stepped off that stage coach so long ago, terrified and uncertain, and wished she could tell her that everything was going to be all right, better than all right, perfect. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and new adventures. Matthew grew up to take over much of the ranch work, eventually marrying a schoolteacher from Denver and bringing her home to Ordway. Sarah became a skilled horse trainer, known throughout Colorado for her way with difficult animals. Daniel surprised everyone by becoming a teacher himself, opening a school in Ordway that served children from all the surrounding ranches. Beatrice and Russell grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard, and feel the satisfaction of a life well lived. When Russell was 68 years old, he suffered a fall while working in the barn and injured his leg badly enough that he could no longer do the heavy ranch work. Matthew took over the day-to-day operations, and Russell struggled at first with the transition from worker to advisor. But Beatrice reminded him that he had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone, and that was the real measure of success. They found new rhythms in their older age. Russell took up woodworking, creating beautiful pieces of furniture for their children and grandchildren. Beatrice finally had time to read all the books she had accumulated over the years, and she would still read aloud to Russell in the evenings, just as she had done when they were newlyweds. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and Beatrice looked around at the faces of the people she and Russell had created and felt her heart swell with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Beatrice and Russell sat on their porch once more, in the same spot where they had sat on so many evenings throughout their marriage. 40 years, Russell said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I watched you step off that stage coach. Other times it feels like I have known you my entire life." "We have built something good here," Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "A family, a legacy, a love that has endured everything life threw at us." "You know what I remember most about that first day?" Russell asked. "The way you looked at me, trying to figure out if you had made a terrible mistake. I was so determined to prove to you that you had not. I think I have spent every day since then still trying to prove it." "You proved it long ago," Beatrice said softly. "You proved it in 1,000 small ways and a few very large ones. You kept every promise you ever made to me, Russell, every single one." "It was easy," Russell said, kissing the top of her head. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. The best thing, too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would continue to shine long after they were gone. Beatrice thought about the mail-order bride who had arrived with so many doubts, and the devoted cowboy who had spent every day proving she made the right choice. She thought about how fear had almost kept her from taking that leap of faith, and how grateful she was that she had been brave enough to try. "No regrets?" Russell asked, as though reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Beatrice said firmly. "Coming here, marrying you, building this life together, it has all been exactly right." "Good," Russell said, squeezing her hand, "because I plan to spend whatever time we have left continuing to prove it to you. That is a promise I will keep until my very last breath." And he did. Through the remaining years they shared, through health challenges and losses and the small joys of growing old together, Russell continued to show Beatrice every day that she had made the right choice. He brought her flowers from the garden she had planted decades ago. He told her she was beautiful even when they were both wrinkled and gray. He held her hand through everything, just as he had promised that first day. When Russell died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Beatrice beside him and their children gathered close, his last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on me. I love you." Beatrice lived for another 8 years after Russell's death, surrounded by the family they had created together. She never remarried, never even considered it. Russell had been her great love, her true partner, and she had been blessed beyond measure to have had him in her life. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch of the ranch house and remember. She would think about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago, and the patient, devoted man who had seen past her fear to the person she could become. She would remember every promise kept, every small gesture of love, every day that Russell had proven himself to be exactly the man he said he was. And she would smile, grateful for every moment, every memory, every year of the beautiful life they had built together. Because in the end, it had all been worth it. The doubt, the fear, the leap of faith. All of it had led her to exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. Russell had promised to spend every day proving she made the right choice, and he had kept that promise until the very end. But the truth that Beatrice carried with her, until her own peaceful death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, was that she had known almost from the beginning. She had known from the first wildflower he brought her, from the first time he gave her choice instead of demands. From the first moment she saw the genuine goodness in his eyes. She had made the right choice. And together, they had built something that would last far beyond their own lives, a legacy of love and partnership and devotion that would echo through generations. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that hot July day in 1882, when she had arrived in Ordway, Colorado, with nothing but doubts and a desperate hope for something better. Russell Emmett had given her everything, and she had given him the same in return. It was, in the end, the greatest love story either of them could have imagined, born from letters and faith and the simple promise to try. They had built their happily ever after, one day at a time, one kept promise at a time, one moment of choosing each other at a time. And it had been absolutely perfect.